Yeah, so this is an opinion piece. Unpopular opinions are inbound. Also, for the sake of this particular discussion, we are talking specifically about Bachmann United States and focusing on their core American prototype line. I am not qualified to talk about Bachmann China, Bachmann Europe, and I don't want to touch the Thomas line with a 50-foot pole, so focusing American only. Also, a swear word is uttered. Thanks, Alex. You've been warned. Bachmann. Name a more controversial manufacturer. Ask someone what they think of Bachmann and you'll likely hear, they're terrible, they're unreliable, they're cheaply made. These are all really common responses, and I've always questioned why this is. I've always found them to be a pretty safe option when shopping for a new locomotive, and looking further into it, I only have more questions and no answers. And I actually think I have a couple points on why you, yes, you, may be dead wrong on Bachmann. This is a Lionel HO GP30. Well, no, this is a Bachmann GP30 in a Lionel HO box. Built during Bachmann's early train-making days when they were still primarily aiming at the toy market, it's mechanically and cosmetically identical to the later Bachmann release after 1978. So it's perfect for our comparison and example here. This is the sort of locomotive that a lot of people tend to picture when Bachmann is on the mind. Single truck, pancake motor drive, the detailing is pretty basic, and you can have one of these for real cheap. This one was pretty much new in box for $16. So why am I bringing this locomotive up? It's not that good, and this video is in defense of Bachmann. This locomotive debuted in 1976, and it ceased production pretty recently in 2020. Now, this would be a problem for most manufacturers, but it isn't a problem for Bachmann. I picked this locomotive for a very specific reason. At the end of its life, it was a far different locomotive than this original 1976 one. In 1988, the entire model was rebuilt from the ground up under the Spectrum line with a die-cast chassis that ran silky smooth, a new body with significantly improved details like metal grabs, and it was all offered at a very mid-range price point. Bachmann would go on to offer both DCC and DCC sound versions in later years, with the final versions being DCC sound and produced in 2020. Now, if you were paying attention, you would have noticed that the GP30 model was in fact improved over time. The 1988 onward Spectrum GP30s are actually still desirable for their very good price and almost unmatched running quality. When DCC became commonplace, Bachmann quickly began to offer the GP30 with factory DCC along with many of their other locomotives, and they would repeat this process for when DCC sound began to gain in popularity. And even then, the price stayed low and the locomotive remained popular thanks to that low price. Bachmann tends to focus on continual improvement, as newly tooled locomotives have generally iterated on their previous work and made meaningful improvements to both mechanism and detailing. Bachmann really started to pick up the pace when they introduced their Spectrum line, and I want to take a moment to talk about the Spectrum line here. Spectrum was Bachmann's high-end line, and it tended to serve as a testbed and an excuse to make some wild prototypes, such as Baldwin and Richmond Modern 440s, the Baltimore and Ohio 2884 EM1, an entire line of ON30 equipment, and so many logging and geared locomotives, many of which can fetch premium prices on the second-hand market just thanks to desirability. Spectrum's crown jewel and where Bachmann really hit their stride was the 280. It was revolutionary and nothing was like it when it debuted in 1998. It had a hidden gearbox, loads of separate details, pulled like a tank, and was a good enough stand-in for many railroads while still being priced as a very mid-range model. And it had something huge, a belt drive. Stop laughing, that's a huge deal. It's no piddly rubber band drive like an Athearn Blue Box. This locomotive has a precision-cut rubber drive belt that allowed Bachmann to conceal the gearbox, making the model look that much more prototypical with no unsightly gearbox between the frame and the boiler. Okay, it wasn't a popular choice with the model buying public because it's kind of a weird choice, but the belt drive in the 280 would prove itself very smooth and more than reliable. It would go on to find itself in 3 other Bachmann locomotives. Michael Ramsey has a really great to the point and in-depth look at the 280, so I would highly recommend checking that out for a much more detailed review of the 280 than what I would get into here. The Spectrum line's innovations also made their way into Bachmann's normal line. This is my friend's GP9 that I so graciously stole to demonstrate this very point. It's not a complex model by any means, and the tooling is, let's be honest, pretty dated. These did come out in the early 2010s after all. It's a entry-level DCC model, and of course, this is the case. It's priced as one, and it would be unfair to compare it to a locomotive twice to 3 times the price like this Scale Train's GP30. Under the hood, though, it can match that Scale Train's locomotive in performance. This is the same chassis that powered the Spectrum GP30, which has worked its way into the rest of the Bachmann line. Even the GP50, when it was discontinued, it had a nearly 30-year-old body, but it still got the same incredibly smooth GP30 drive. It is incredibly smooth, entirely die-cast, very reliable, easy to service, and it pulls all you need a GP unit to realistically pull. In my experience, Bachmann has just as good as reliability as any other manufacturer. My J-Class reliably muscled 15 plus overly heavy freight cars on a club layout at full power for about 4 hours straight and had 0 issues, and then proceeded to do another 4 hours and repeated it the very next day. Almost all my Bachmann locomotives have been incredibly reliable from the factory, with one exception, my 440. But that was repaired under warranty with no issues, and it cost me nothing. It's been a very reliable runner ever since. I've never had an issue that came from regular and well-maintained operation beyond that. All the issues I've had were self-inflicted from train wrecks or botched detail or wiring operations. Bachmann locomotives have always been project material. Since their first models, Bachmann stuff has always been ripe for modification. In large part, this is thanks to some very dubious prototype choices. They could be altered to fit a wide variety of roads, or you could make up your own road and own details. While diesel locomotives were standard across all roads, Bachmann opted to make generic models of steam locomotives that could stand in for a wide variety of roads. Many of these models came as a plain black unlettered locomotive, making lettering them even easier than it already was. Almost every layout seems to have at least 1 or 2 Bachmann locomotives hanging around that are lettered for their respective road. MSRP seems to come up a lot in any discussion about Bachmann, and if we're being real here, if you pay that, you kinda deserve to be ripped off. Most manufacturers will sell you a model at a hobby store discounted, but Bachmann by far and away has the largest price gap between their MSRP and stores. And this is intentional. We'll use one of Bachmann's newer locomotives here as an example. So we'll talk about the J3A Hudson here. Bachmann's current MSRP for this locomotive is $509. That is ridiculous. However, if you do literally any amount of searching for this same locomotive, reveals very quickly that hobby stores have this locomotive for around 40 to 45% off that sticker price. So why is this? Here's what a local hobby store owner told me. Bachmann does not want you to buy directly from them. Instead, Bachmann makes deals with stores to send the store's products in bulk at a pretty steep discount. This allows Bachmann to produce a much larger run of models, taking advantage of buying parts in bulk themselves, making them cheaper to produce. The store will then turn around and sell you that model at a much larger discount, and it's all a ploy to essentially get you to support your stores. It's a bold and honestly pretty commendable effort from Bachmann. Bachmann also does not have a minimum price floor that you can advertise at. So if something goes on clearance, it can be advertised at what you actually sell it at, unlike how some manufacturers, namely Lionel, do it. Bachmann is also weirdly becoming more and more important by doing nothing. Who makes train sets in HO anymore? Athearn stopped doing it a couple of years ago, and even Athearn sets used Bachmann track. Lionel's HO sets are lackluster at best. Walters only offers 3 identical train sets with just the paint job change, and yet Bachmann over here is offering currently 27 different train sets with a variety of motive power, rolling stock, and that fit a wide variety of themes. So, what's the issue with Bachmann? It seems like they're taking good steps to create a wide range of good running, affordable, and attainable equipment and are actively taking a stand to keep stores in business. Are they the perfect manufacturer? Absolutely not. There's no such thing as a perfect manufacturer. Even fan favorite manufacturers stumble sometimes and create duds. Some common modern issues with Bachmann, personally, that I have include a pretty subpar stock DCC decoder, some dated diesel toolings, the soft, way too yellow light that they've been using for 20 years now, excessively light steam locomotives, the occasional way too high price even after store discount, and of course, the infamous steam locomotive and tender plugs. But these are things that other manufacturers do as well. Some high-end brands also have that issue. I'm namely looking at you, Broadway Limited, and your unpainted driver centers. This stuff doesn't seem to bother the general model railroad world when other manufacturers get away with it so easily. So, what's Bachmann's true biggest issue? Do you notice something here? Something a little weird? Yeah, the most commonly discussed flaws are things from the 80s and 90s and not today. Many will simply not let Bachmann let go of their early toy grade era. Tyco hasn't garnered nearly the same level of hate simply because Tyco just no longer exists. There's nostalgia for it. The changing market killed off the Spectrum line when DCC sound started to become the norm. Bachmann couldn't stay making low-priced detailed equipment under the Spectrum line when we, as a customer base, started wanting low-priced sound equipment in the 2010s. The Williams line ended up suffering because the Williams strategy of low-priced detailed equipment with basic electronics just couldn't sell in the O-gauge market anymore. Bachmann makes stuff for the budget conscious, but some people just can't be bothered with a quick Google search and immediately call out MSRP as the actual price. Horror stories are frequently shared among the internet about Bachmann locomotives blowing up or mechanical failures. And how much of this is actually true? Well, upon asking a few others and from my own personal experience, not much of it. A lot of the toy grade 60s and 90s stuff, sure, those were notorious for gear cracking thanks to nylon gears, but it's unfair to judge an entire brand based upon their history, especially when for half that history, they've actually been flying under the radar and making some pretty good stuff. I mean, it's like saying modern Athearn is good because they had a good pass during the Blue Belt. I am going to get murdered for that one. Since 2020, Bachmann has been stepping up their game even more, with the SC44 Charger leading the charge. The Hudson I mentioned earlier seems to be a real turning point. It's a diecast 464 with wow sound from the factory at a pretty agreeable price. A club member has one and he absolutely loves it. It's a real step up from Bachmann's previous steam locomotives with stellar performance, and it can actually pull. I threw a friend under the bus and asked him for some opinions, and here's what my buddy had to say.
Hi guys, Nate asked me to give my thoughts on Bachmann, and he didn't really give me any parameters, so I'm just going to say what I generally think about Bachmann. Bachmann is way too overhated. This might be a hot take. This might be a take that you expected from me. But the reason I feel it is overhated is because there's this sort of groupthink mentality on in the model train community where lots of model railroading veterans who were around in the 70s, 80s when Bachmann genuinely was an inferior company making subpar products, toy train grade stuff. And nowadays, those individuals really only remember Bachmann for making basically toy trains and stuff that isn't considered actual models. And it seems like it's sort of a trend for budding modelers and people who want to seem like they have a different opinion from the norm to hate on Bachmann and say that they're trash and toy grade and can't produce a decent quality model, and that all they are just toy trains that, as I said, can't be on par with products like Rapido and scale trains and things like that. And that's perfectly fine. It's kind of a nuanced, topic. Bachmann is not meant to be Rapido or Scale Trains or MTH or even Broadway Limited, honestly. They are meant to be, and they know their place in the market now as the manufacturer that can make a genuinely solid product, usually not perfect, usually not 100% accurate, but they can make a solid product for an affordable price. And pretty much every issue that plagued the company, like the splitting gears issues or just split chassis, stuff like that, is pretty much obsolete. And I feel like people aren't willing to give them much of a chance these days, or at least the majority of people in their opinions in what I've seen so far. And everyone just kind of wants to rag on Bachmann for some reason, when in reality, Bachmann is the only manufacturer that's sort of consistently pumping out prototypes of locomotives that me and a bunch of my other friends and modelers genuinely seem to want, which is smaller steam. Like, who else is making modern smaller steam these days in sort of the past 20 years? It's really just Bachmann. They retooled the 440. They're the only company that you can get a nice, ready-to-run, reliable 1800s era 440 from. Bachmann deserves a lot more credit. They are not supposed to be the most detailed stuff, but they certainly hold their own. They're great bases for kit bashing, and the stuff really runs well. Like, everything pretty much post-Spectrum, once they worked out the cracked gear issues and started to move away from split chassis, all that stuff is pretty damn good. It's all a solid mechanism. I really don't know why people seem to not want to give them a chance. Some of the markers look a little bit weird. There's some things here and there where it's like, it's worth changing out with brass parts, but that's sort of the fun of it. Like I said, they're excellent bases for kit bashing and doing a little bit of extra work to make it your own and make it unique. But I mean, like, hell, Bachmann is painting their axles, their axle ends, and companies like Broadway Limited aren't. That cost 70 times more. TLDR, the Bachmann hate is undeserved. Stop assimilating with this groupthink mentality to try and have a differing radical opinion compared to everyone else who's like, yeah, Bachmann's pretty all right. Just, take a look at what they're actually doing nowadays. They're not doing what they did in the 80s and 70s anymore. They've evolved. They've gotten much better. And honestly, I'd argue that they are probably the leading pioneer in the model train industry at this point. Just because they're taking risks. A lot of manufacturers are not willing to take risks with the small steam and things like that. So yeah, give Bachmann more credit.
Now, I absolutely don't agree with everything he said, but Alex and I have very different priorities with model trains, and it never hurts to hear a different perspective, and these criticisms are valid for someone who values detail. The criticisms he made will not affect everyone. I think a lot of this stuff is fine because while the toolings are quite dated, they're cheap to make and they run great, and this is what a lot of people kind of value. Most of his criticisms are things, however, that I just don't see discussed when talking about why Bachmann is a bad manufacturer. Bachmann is a brand that is trying to prove its worth in the modern model train world, and yet people can't seem to let them let go of the past. Any flaws in a Bachmann model, no matter how minute, are treated as a massive issue before telling the reader or listener how much of a letdown that model is. Every model has flaws, this is nothing new, but the amount of hand-waving we give high-end manufacturers for a model 3 times the price for crap performance and details that should be present just feels blatantly untrue when the same group will nitpick a super cheap Bachmann locomotive for its details only. And with all of that being said, I want to ask you this. Is it really that wrong for a manufacturer to produce trains with a more budget-conscious and beginner modelers who aren't going to be too concerned about the details and just want to play trains? Well, I don't think so. And if it wasn't for Bachmann, I would not be here making anything train related today. As always, thank you for watching, thank you for your time, and as always, stay unruly.